All right, so today we're talking about a very fundamental topic in CSS, and that is how to use CSS. How to use CSS. So at the end of the video, you should be able to know the three ways in which you can use CSS inside your HTML file to style your web pages. We're going to understand the three ways to be able to do that. So first of all, let's proceed. There are three ways you can use CSS in your to style your web page. And the first two is what we call the inline CSS. The inline CSS. All right. So we'll just comment this to guide us as to what we want to do. The inline CSS. Secondly, we're going to be talking about the second way we can use CSS in our HTML file, which is the internal CSS. Internal CSS. So comment it. Control/N. Finally, the external CSS. The external CSS. The external CSS. Control/. So these are the three ways you can use CSS in your HTML file. So let's look at the inline CSS. What is the inline CSS all about? What's the syntax for the inline CSS? The inline CSS is a process in which you add your CSS styling directly inside the HTML element. You add your CSS styling directly inside the HTML element. How do you get that done? Let's say you have an HTML element, the header element, all right? Each one. So it has a content. Let's say, welcome to CSS. All right, so that's the content. This is, in our last class, we talked about the anatomy of the HTML element. So I'm sure you know what I mean by what I've just written. All right, so here you add in inline CSS, you have the styling inside the element as an attribute. All right, so you have the style attribute here. You come in between the opening tag, you write your style attribute here. Already you can begin styling. Let's say we want this H1 tag to have a color of blue. Alright, you can just use inside the style attribute, you put the color. And another thing that we'll enjoy from using our VS Code is that it has IntelliSense. So most times as you try to write something, the VS Code will try to know what we are doing and bring suggestions. So that's a good way to make our codes faster and more easier. So let's try to use the color style. Want the color to be blue. It's a color of blue. All right. So Control save. So let's run it on our browser and see. Control R. Are you seeing? So we have basically styled our H1 tag, giving it a color of blue using the inline CSS. All right. The inline CSS to add the style attribute inside of the HTML element you want to style. All right, you add it inside the HTML element you want to style. So secondly, the second way you can use the CSS in our HTML file is through the internal CSS. The internal CSS. In the internal CSS, it's quite different from the inline CSS. In internal CSS, we use the style element. All right, we use the style element, and this style element is embedded inside the head of your HTML file. All right, so like let's go to this head after the title here. We have the style element. It's going to come out style. All right, so the style element has an opening and a closing tag. So you write the style element in the head part of your HTML file. Then you can begin styling. All right, you can begin styling. So in internal CSS, we use the style element. While in the inline CSS, we use the style attribute. Please take note. In the inline CSS, we use the style attribute for styling inside the element. While in the internal CSS, we use the style element for styling. All right, so let me come and say, let me use a p tag. I'll say, all right, let me say p tag paragraph. This is internal CSS. All right, this is internal CSS. So I'll now go. So I'll try to style it inside the head. In the head, we style it by using the selectors. All right, You style it, the internal CSS, you style in the head using what we call the selectors. The selector. So let's say you want to select this element for styling. You are selecting. There are three ways you can select an element for styling in internal CSS. And the first way is selecting by tag name, selecting by class name, then selecting by ID name. So right now I want to style this paragraph element by selecting it with the tag name. So we'll come here, select P for paragraph, all right, then we now open a curly bracket, then we can now begin styling. This is the syntax, the selector followed by the curly bracket, then inside the curly bracket, that's how you begin to style. So let me see, okay, I want to style this P tag and give it a, let me say style, let me change the font size, all right, let me style it, give it a style of red color. First of all, let me run so that we'll see our P tag and it has appeared here. All right, so let me give it a font size, increase its font size, and also change the color. Let me give it a color of red or something. So I'll come here, I'll say font size. You need to try to write the font size, it's going to come out. So that's one of the benefits of using a text editor like VS Code. It has intelligence that is able to work with you and guess and probably work with you and make your work more easier. So let's say we want to change the font size to, let's say we want it to be 50px. All right, 50px. So let's control reload it. Are you seeing? We're going to style. Are you seeing the font size 50px? We'll be able to style our paragraph tag using the internal CSS. All right, secondly, let me add the color. I'll say color of red. All right, or let me use brown. Control R, run it, and we have the styling effected on our browser. All right, so this the second way you can use CSS inside your HTML file, using the CSS to style your HTML element. All right, finally, the last way is what we call the external CSS. Just like the name implies, the external CSS, in the external CSS, you have a separate CSS file. You don't style inside your HTML file, unlike the inline CSS that we just finished, we studied, and the internal CSS. In the external CSS, you style it in a separate CSS file. So right now, let's create a separate CSS file. Let's go to our root, our root here. Right click, create a new file. Let's call it style.css. All right, style.css. Then save it. So we have a new CSS file called file.css. Alright, so now we have created our external CSS file. We'll call it style.css. Style.css. So let's go back to our HTML file. Alright, so how do we link our HTML to this external CSS file? We come back to the head. Let's come back to the head. Then you now click on the link element. Let's go and look for the link rel. The link, yes. Click on it and you have something like this. So now put the style folder, that the HTML represents the hypertext reference, talking about the address of the CSS file. So if we know, we named our CSS file here style.css, so that's the address, style.css. So this, we have successfully linked our CSS file. Alright, so let's now go back to our, first of all, let's create element. Let me create a history element here. Alright, so let me create a history element. I'll say history. I'll call this an external CSS file. Alright, so let's go to our CSS file. Alright, to comment, the first thing we'll do is to the external CSS file has the same working syntax like our internal CSS file. The only difference is that the external CSS file is done, the styling is done on a separate CSS file, alright? Unlike the internal CSS file where the styling is done inside of the head element in your HTML file. All right, so they are basically the same syntax. So let's say I want to style my history element, which I created inside my history element, which I created inside my HTML file. So I want to style it. We go to the first of all, let's come around this here. So I have this an external CSS file. So we want to style it here. The first thing we are styling by tag name. So let's call the history here. History. All right, then our curly bracket, open it up. You can begin style. We can say give this a color of, let's give a distinct color, a color of chocolate. All right, let's call it chocolate. When you go and control R load, you see we have successfully styled our HTML file using the external CSS method. All right, the external CSS method. So this is basically how you can style, how you use CSS to style your HTML file. All right, but let me just touch a little about the three methods we select our element for styling. I've worked with the selecting and styling using the tag name. All right, so let me just talk about the how to select and style using class name and ID name. All right, so you know what is important? It's important selecting and styling using class and ID name is important. It's very important while styling. So in order to avoid errors and while styling, because if you are trying to select and style using the tag name, you discover that it's possible to have more than one paragraph element in a particular file. All right. So if you are styling by the tag name, you discover that the style is going to apply to all your paragraph elements. And let's say you just want to style probably the first paragraph element in your file, in your HTML file, discover that that style you made for that particular element is going to reflect on all paragraph elements you have on your HTML file. So to be able to overcome this challenge, the programmers have to come with a new method, two new methods that allow you to style more uniquely and more distinctly. And those methods is what we call styling by class name and styling by ID name. What's the difference? You just come, if you want to style by ID name, you just come to your history element here and just give it a class name of, let's say, class name of header. All right, class name of, let me work with the paragraph element. Let me come and give it a class name here, a class name of paragraph. All right, paragraph, paragraph. Perfect. So right now let's style it here on the using the internal CSS. We'll come here. We want to select it by the class name. We'll come here. Before you can, the class name here, the class name we give the P element is paragraph. All right. So but for you to be able to let the system know that this is a class name, you have to put a dot followed by the class name. All right. It will give, that's what we label it as a class name. If there's no dot before the class name, it's not going to reflect. All right, your style is not going to be reflected because your identification did not work. All right, so let's come here. We'll say paragraph element. We'll say P. Don't forget the P tag is what the content of P tag is this internal CSS. This is internal CSS. This is what, like, this is the content of our P tag. All right, so let's come here and say P tag. We'll come here and give it a class, a styling of, let's say, font weight. Let the font weight be 300 px. All right, so control R, control run here. Let's not work with font weight. First of all, let's delete this other, what we did there. So let's style it here. Let's go and run it to discover that it's not normal. We'll come and style it and give it a of color of chartreuse. All right, you come here or you discover that this is the color. Let's come also and give it a font size of 50 px. Come here, and this is it, perfect. So we'll be able to style with class name. All right, we're able to style with class name. So let's style also with ID name. We'll come to this h1 and give it an ID name of, or let me work with h4. Let me come create a new element called the h4 element. H4 element. Let me call it, this is selecting using ID name. All right, so come and get an ID name of let me call it ID name of header, or header 1, because we have a header in our style sheet here. Okay, well, let's call it header. We don't have a header. Header is okay. So we'll go to our head here and come. So one thing to identify that you're selecting by ID name is that you must put the / before the ID name. You must put the hash before the ID name. So let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so my system setting is set on UK. Let me change it to US because that's what works with what we know. ID, then we have the header. All right, we have the header. Don't forget, let's run this first of all so that our text for the H4 will appear. This is select use the ID name. We'll come here also, the curly bracket. Then we have change the color also. We have color to be crimson. All right, same here. It's now crimson. I'll be able to style using the ID name. Let's come and say, give it a font size also. Let the font size be 100 px, and we'll have the same thing. It is now 100 px. So basically, this is how to use CSS. So far, I've talked about the 3 ways to use CSS. We talk about the inline CSS. We talk about the internal CSS and the external CSS, and also talk about the 3 ways to select elements for styling. I think you can select using tag name. We did that. You can select using class name, and you can select element for styling using the ID name. I trust that at the end of this, as this class has come to an end, you'll be able to master how you use your HTML, how you use CSS in your HTML file. So, thank you very much. See you some other time. Bye.